There exists a master list of 1001 books that every human person must read before they're allowed to die. Let me see how I stack up. So today I'm going to go through the list of 1001 books you must read before you die. This is actually a book that is compiled by, I think, over 100 different people. It's released a couple different versions. I'm going to be using the list that's on the website, listchallenges.com. I'll link that in the description if you want to check it out for yourself. They have compiled the list that includes, I believe, different versions in one, up to including 2018. So that's what I'll be using for this video. I debated on the best way to do this video. I was going to try a Tinder style left swipe, right swipe thing with everyone, but that would take forever to set up, and also it would be very boring, because as it turns out, I have not heard of a whole bunch of these books. Instead, I'm going to go through the list and then talk about the ones that I have read. So I've been through the list and I counted up my total, and out of the 1001 books, which is actually a few more than that by now, I've read 21. So let's go ahead and discuss. These are also in no particular order. Okay, the first one is Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. I actually did a review of this book on my channel a few months ago. I might link that here if I remember to do that. Yeah, this was an okay book. One of the first Gothic horror novels. The second book is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I read this a couple years ago. I really enjoyed it. I kind of want to reread it just to see if my opinion has changed. But as I remember, it's a pretty atmospheric, kind of a slower moving book, but with really compelling characters, some really thoughtful ideas. Number 3 is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I just read this. It was not my favorite. It had parts that were really good, and also had parts that were really boring. Next up is The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a short story. It's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I can see why it would be included on this list. Also, a fun fact about The Fall of the House of Usher: it's going to be adapted into a Netflix miniseries directed by Mike Flanagan, so this should be interesting to watch. Next is another Edgar Allan Poe story, The Purloined Letter, and to be honest, I don't understand why this one is on the list. So if you don't know what this is the third short story in a series of kind of mystery novel short stories starring the character C. Auguste Dupin. The first one is the Murders in the Rue Morgue. The second one was the Mystery of Marie Roget, I believe. And then the third one is the Purloined Letter. And out of the three, the first one is most likely going to be the best one in every list you can think of. The second one is pretty boring. The third one I liked a little more, but again, I don't think it was better than Murders in the Rue Morgue, so why this is on there, I don't really understand. And then the final Edgar Allan Poe story, The Pit and the Pendulum, is on here. And this, I would say, is probably my favorite of his short stories. Has some great descriptions, really invokes a lot of feelings as you're reading it, and I certainly understand why this is included on the list. Number 7 is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I read this a few years ago. I didn't love it. It was an okay book. I think some of the themes and some of the symbolism is a little outdated and not really all that relatable. At least not to me, I don't think. It had some neat ideas, but overall it was kind of a dry read. Next up is At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. This is the only Lovecraft story on the list, and it's also the only Lovecraft story I've read so far. I think it's worthy to be on the list, but again, it's not my favorite. It's very dry, very cumbersome to read, but it also had some neat ideas and some scary imagery. And rounding out my least favorite grouping of the list is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I recently read this, And again, I really didn't care for it. The characters were very annoying. There was not a lot of action or a lot of suspense for most of the story. The writing was hard to get through. And I lied, there's one more that I didn't care for. Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This was only about 70 pages long. But it felt like it was 400 pages. Just very dense, very thick, just blocks of text. There's like no breaks in them at all. I think there's only 2 chapters in the book. And again, some of the themes are kind of outdated. Not that they're not important or anything, but they're just not things that you can relate to very much in 2022 or, whatever year it is these days. But somehow this book has left a lasting impression on something. It did inspire a movie, Apocalypse Now. Number 11 is 1984 by George Orwell. This is a pretty good book. I haven't read a whole lot of the dystopian classics, but I'd say right now this one is probably my favorite. It's not the most exciting read, but I think it's compelling nonetheless. I think the narrative that is in place it carries the story through well enough, but also the supporting themes and the world that is built up and is explained, and kind of the materials that are explored throughout the book are all very interesting, especially when compared to society of today or of the near future. It's fun to compare and contrast. Well, I wouldn't say it's fun, but it's interesting. And next up is the only Stephen King book on the list, which I find peculiar. He's one of the most prolific authors in history, but yet only one of his books have made this list, and that is The Shining. Now, granted, this is one of his better books. Inspired one of the best horror movies of all time. It's pretty prolific in the public eye, I'd say. I haven't read this in years, so I don't remember how much I liked it. But I do remember liking it when I did read it. So I would like to read this at some point to see how it holds up. The next one is The Call of the Wild by Jack London. This is also a good book, about the Alaskan wilderness and sled dogs and the wilderness. I preferred White Fang to Call of the Wild, but this one is good as well. Number 14 is Life of Pi by Yann Martel. I actually did a video on this one too. Not gonna link it. It's kind of a bad video, to be honest. But I did really like this book. I also love the movie. There are some really great themes and really great symbolism in the book. Also some great characters that you get to know very well. The next one is 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. I read this in junior high. I really enjoyed it. I haven't read it since, but I'm pretty sure it holds up very well, considering that it has endured this lasting legacy that it has. Also inspiring another Kubrick movie that is one of the better sci-fi movies in history. Number 16 is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This was another book that I read in junior high that I really enjoyed. I actually do want to reread this here pretty soon to see if my opinion has changed any, or if it's still as good as I remember it being. But obviously this is one of the best books ever written. I'm sure you've heard of it, so I'm sure you know what it's about. Number 17 is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I read this one in high school. It was okay. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites of all time, but it's definitely a classic. The next book is The Grapes of Wrath, also by John Steinbeck. I recently read this a few months ago. It's pretty good. I still had mixed feelings about some of the themes in the book, but overall it's a fairly good read. I'd say it's well deserving of being on this list. Up next we have The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is obviously the first book in the Lord of the Rings series, one of the best, if not the best, fantasy series of all time. It's been adapted into several movies. I have read The Hobbit twice, once in middle school and once in high school. It's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's my favorite book, but I enjoyed it both times. I would like to reread that here coming up soon, as I try to get into Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, for the first time. Number 20 is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. I really enjoyed this book. It's a very short read as well. I actually listened to the audiobook on YouTube, narrated by Charlton Heston, while I read this, and that was really interesting. So I do recommend that if you can do that. This is my only Hemingway that I've read so far, but I really enjoyed his unique writing style and the characterization in the book and the themes. And then finally, number 21 is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Read this a few months ago and it was a little disappointing. I know a lot of people love this book. A lot of people are also very mixed on this book, and I've heard that you have to read it more than once to get it, whatever that means. I thought it was an okay book. I didn't think it was that great. I felt like it should have been longer. I felt like some of the writing structure was kind of off, could have been improved on. Anyways, it was an okay book. I'd say it's probably worth being on the list, but it's not the best book of all time. And that's it. So that's all the books on this list that I've read so far. I've got a few more to go, obviously. So which ones on this list have you read? Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you for watching, and say hello, say yeah.